everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. My guest today is Wendy Bendoni. Wendy is a professor at Woodbury University. I recently had the pleasure of guest lecturing at her luxury brand management class. Wendy and I have done a joint talk together a couple years ago. But without further ado, Wendy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
I had a good time a few weeks ago speaking in front of your class. It was a new session of the luxury brand management class, and it was 4 or 5 years ago that I did my last one. What did your students think after I don't know, assaulted them with information for 2 hours?
No, they loved it. So yeah, it's a brand new class. It was our second session, and it's luxury brand marketing. They're business students, so they understand business, but they're still fairly new to the world of luxury. So you actually made them feel a little bit better in regards to your take on certain parts of luxury. So I actually think you helped them a lot. So they're working on a project now that you kind of inspired. But yeah.
I was really impressed with those kids. I mean, it's funny. I'm at the age where anyone in college looks like a kid to me, right? But I was impressed with their professionalism. Tell me a little bit about how long you've been teaching this class and maybe a little bit how it fits into the educational department or whatnot at Woodbury, because I don't think that luxury brand management is a common class that's available out there.
Yeah, no, it's, I started this class 2016, and we did not have a luxury courses at all. And I actually discovered it from a research project I did in Florence. And I ended up meeting a professor from the University of Zurich, and he was studying watches. And my area is kind of digital marketing, and we started talking. And next thing you know, this is kind of the idea of the class, and teaching students in the US a little bit about global luxury. And that's kind of how it started. And then it was very interesting because, you know, you have some students that maybe take 3 buses to get to school, and some other students that are driving a very nice luxury car. And you have to put them all on the same kind of level to understand what luxury is. And I actually love doing it because it's a discovery for me. So,
is this a required class as part of any program, or was this what you'd call an elective?
It's elective.
Okay. We do know, of course, that there are entire programs about luxury in the scope of fashion or management. Is there any entire program that you know of in the United States?
As far as a business program, typically I see those going for like graduate programs. So undergraduate, which is what I'm teaching, the class that you came to. So those typically it's a minor, a couple electives, a series of electives. But as far as a major, I haven't seen that unless it's a certificate program or a master's program.
So was this a class that existed before you started teaching it, or were you the one that was really the genesis of this class being taught at your university?
No, I was definitely the one. So that was, it was from a very, very interesting conversation of a Swiss professor educating a U.S. professor what luxury was. So it was a very long conversation.
And how was that program received by, I guess, the other faculty in the department? Because if it's sort of an uncommon thing, was it seen as, oh, that's a good addition? Did some people scoff and they're like, oh, luxury, this is a school? I'm just curious what their reaction was.
Yeah. You know, part of it is that a lot of people assumed that it was just around the world of fashion. But at our school, we also have architecture. So we actually kind of had this idea of making it about luxury experiences, luxury, you know, design. And that kind of opened to make it a little bit more cross-disciplinary, which is always better. I mean, that's just kind of the real world. So it's been doing really well. And the idea is, you know, what is luxury, and kind of, you know, this discovery process. So not a lot of students know a lot about luxury, but they're very curious. I think everybody's kind of curious about luxury. So for an undergraduate elective, what it is, like how you define it. And a lot of times they tend to assume it has to do with heritage, and others believe that it's kind of in the area of whatever their interests are. So cars, that's their luxury, or fashion, then that's their luxury. But they don't understand any other luxury outside of, what they know.
How do you structure, I guess you could say, a curriculum around it? You showed me a textbook that you use a little bit, which is sort of on point. But how do you put together, for lack of better terminology, I'm not a trained educator, a whole course lesson plan?
Well, I think the idea is that, they don't have any history of, they don't have any prior knowledge really of luxury.
The students.
Besides maybe an influencer wearing something, or they know that's an expensive champagne or an expensive car driving by. But they don't really know a lot about it, and they don't know, what qualifies as luxury. And with that, I find that I have to find a book that kind of educates them a little bit about the history, some way to quantify what they call luxury. And then they quickly learn that it's almost like art. It's really in the eyes of the beholder and what they consider luxury for them. So I tend to use about 2 different books, and then a lot of case studies, and then luckily I get to bring someone in like you to kind of share some real world aspects, with them.
I spent, I'm guessing 15, 20 minutes with this class only before, slightly different conversation each time on this definition of luxury. Early on in my career, I went through the struggle of trying to define this term. We don't need to go through that exhaustive discussion right now. But that's sort of an interesting thing, because at the precipice of studying this topic, or at least being introduced to it, you first have to define what you're talking about. Early on, when you were trying to put together sort of an educational look at this, how did you think about what the definition of luxury was, especially when communicating to other people at the university? Because you have to have an academic definition of it. What did you, or maybe the conversation never came up. They assumed that everyone knows what luxury is. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's, going back a little bit to that, we'll just call it a conversation in Florence with my Swiss Italian friend. There was something I found really interesting, is that we were talking about Burberry. And when we were talking about it, Christopher Bailey was the creative director, and they kind of really made like digital creative. So I was very high on Burberry and how they brought luxury in. And then I was quickly corrected.
This when they had the Britain watch?
Yeah, they did. And they, the idea is they being my friend, did not consider that true luxury. And then we got into the conversation of what is luxury. And then I realized, part of, being in a room teaching others, whatever it is that really what you're just trying to do is expand the knowledge they already know, but really try to keep like a conversation, a topic, which you're very good at when you come speak to the students. But they really like that. So for them to define what luxury is, I don't have to put that into a curriculum. Your objectives could be just have a better understanding of what luxury is, and also discovering how the world of luxury contributes to our economy. So those would be kind of things that you could pull. But for the students to really get kind of excited about the class, because it's a 4-hour, 7-week class, so it's pretty intense. But they get really excited when they get to realize they can define what luxury is and then kind of create a project around that.
What are many of the students trying to get out of it? Obviously, some of them want to work in this field. What are some of the applicable skills you think people can take learning about luxury that they can then take on to other jobs? Is it maybe applicable to people working in any type of consumer product where it's good to know how luxury does it? I guess I'm just asking, in your opinion, how wide should the interest be from an academic perspective in luxury, at least in the United States?
Well, I mean, we actually got a really good turnout of students wanting to take the class. And where I found out quickly, not a lot of them knew about, luxury or a lot of, the extent of what luxury is. They were all very curious how it could could be part of maybe what they want to do. So, like I said, these are undergraduates, so they're still kind of discovering new careers. And like, for instance, learning about, curing and its, sustainability kind of ideas and what they would like to put into their pillar as far as, their future. Some students did not know that there was a sustainability aspect to luxury brands or conglomerates. And that is like a whole new career for them they didn't even think about. They were thinking it had to be in something like recycling or something that, working at a resale store. But they didn't know that, on the scale of a company like Kering, that they would have a division that was kind of dedicated to that. And even that division has 12 other divisions. So for them, especially when you're talking about Gen Z, they are really into transparency. So for them, that's kind of important. Hence the question they asked you about vintage and how you felt about it. And, they're very curious about that.
Talk a little bit about their interest in sustainability. Obviously, it's a very loaded term that connects to a lot of things such as social responsibility, environmentalism, climate change, things like that. Since you are speaking to not just young people, but young people that are in a college environment and obviously very open with their thoughts, describe a little bit about the experience with, we'll just call it environmentalism, with a 20-year-old today that maybe a 40 or 60-year-old can't really relate to and maybe should know a little bit more about.
Yeah. So, I feel like at this point I've been teaching long enough that I taught the millennials, and now I'm going on to the Gen Z. And one thing I've noticed with this group is that millennials were very much, they wanted sustainability in what they purchased. But when we actually saw what they purchased, it wasn't necessarily sustainable. So they like the idea of it, but the follow through wasn't exactly there. Where this group, even though they're quite young in getting into the world of luxury, they like to know about these brands that have this kind of extension to them. So what does that mean? So part of that is not only about the material, but really they are looking for, in regards to how the employees are treated, how the materials are collected. They want to know. They want to know more about it. So, and it's funny because some of the films that some of these really large luxury companies have done that are like targeted, they think, to this group, they find them kind of ridiculous because it kind of dumbs it down. And
but
Gen Z
that's time immemorial when a company intentionally tries to be attractive or speak to someone younger. They always sound cheesy, right? Like every time.
Oh, it's so bad. And it's, I try to show it and have this like authoritative, like, this is this company with, I won't give the name, but, and they just are giggling. Like, what is this? And I'm like, well, this is what they did. And why didn't they just say that? Why do they have to make it seem like this skit? It's like, just show us what you're doing. Like, give us some.
You remember when you were younger, it was like, kids will listen if you rap it.
Yeah. That's kind of it. And it's, I mean, they are aware, so they don't like that. I mean, that is definitely a turn away to them. So.
Now, let me ask you this. Where are they learning that sustainability is an issue? I mean, I don't see how it affects the day-to-day life of a 20-year-old any more than someone older. Obviously, it's something through their media. What are they seeing or hearing about related to sustainability in the products they buy that maybe a different generation never heard about or just didn't seem to care about?
I mean, it's no shock that, they're on social. They're on social a lot. And especially with the aspect of now social being in a story format, whatever you're on, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. So they are watching this idea about, especially in the world of fashion. So like the students are kind of interested in that area, how much waste is out there and how it's actually hurting our world. So they, probably 5 years ago, all my students wanted to be influencers. Now they want to be entrepreneurs, have a business, and somehow give back. It's kind of like a mixture of like Patagonia mixed in with, a Supreme, something like that. And they want to find some way to be a little bit more transparent. But it's TikTok. I mean, honestly, a lot of the things that we've been kind of sharing in class is because we actually had an interesting conversation because you asked them something about, where did they see their last kind of,
like
experience with luxury.
Yeah.
And they all were silent. And what we really got into is that it really is about like the influencers that they're following, or, some of the students in the class are really into race cars. So that's who they kind of follow. But I feel like that's part of the narrative of the people that they're following online and what they're talking about.
Is it odd to them that it's, again, they're all about transparency? I think the business model of the influencer is more or less out there, right? Like, not quite a secret that these people are doing it for the money, but they still seem to have a lot of sway. And I think that's a curious thing in the luxury space, because brands are always trying to figure out who can speak on behalf of them that would be a good ambassador or someone who would have a credibility. Why is it that these individuals, despite the fact that they're essentially opinion mercenaries, still carry so much weight with a demographic that you and others have said, is particularly skeptical when it comes to what they hear?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big question, but, the idea is that for them, the influencer is kind of like, what we used to turn TV on and see every station. It's just part of what they watch. They stream that. A lot of them, they're not going to movies anymore. They're literally watching everything online. So that's just part of their popular culture and how they kind of get their information. I definitely have noticed how influencers have changed who they're following. They're definitely smaller. Like, they follow a lot of like nano influencers, that don't have a lot of followers, but they're really talking to them. Mm-hmm. But then you have other extremes, like, any of the girls in Blackpink, like everybody in my class would follow them and see what they're doing. And one of them is doing like the luxury jewelry for Chanel. I mean, is it Chanel? Yeah, for Chanel. Mm-hmm. And yet I know none of these students can afford it. That's their Vogue, front cover magazine. So it's just kind of the word of mouth, that aspirational idea. I don't think it's the best way if you're trying to, convert and kind of make a sale. But as far as just getting, brand exposure and for this next generation to kind of learn about it, I think it's great. But they definitely tend to go towards to the products that the influencers they follow the most go to.
Now, that leads in sort of my next question. That is, what are their aspirations? They talk, I'm sure, a lot about the brands that they like or they notice, but what do you notice that they themselves want to own, either now or maybe distant in the future, knowing that there's no way they can afford it, but it's sort of like on a wish list for maybe when they can? I guess I'm curious, what types of luxury consumers are they turning out to possibly be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say consistently all of them, I think the world of fashion is still very strong. Men, women, both of them are very interested in that. But then they tend to go towards actually cars. Cars was like a really big conversation for us. Like, the movies that have the cars in them, the cars that they kind of aspire to have. That seemed like, and a lot of them was from the experiences they got to do. So there's a lot of like the Porsche test ground. So they got to go into a Porsche. And once they got to do that, they are in. Like, that's what they want. So that, I think those kind of world of luxury was important. As far as travel, that's not really, for them, they're still Airbnb. It doesn't have to be luxury. It's really about, some of the pieces, whether it's, a bag or a car, that seemed to be the big conversations for them.
Would you say that watches are on their radar? They know that watches are a thing? Because I think that 10 or 20 years ago, if you would have spoken to a group of 20-year-olds about luxury, probably not a lot of them would have brought up watches. Whereas my guess is that's different today. How big of a category within the luxury space would you say they feel watches are?
I think it's like half and half. Some of them knew about watches. Actually, the name that came up the most was John Mayer. and watches. So that kind of like educated them a little bit. But other than that, most of them had just known about Rolex. So Rolex was the conversation and they all agreed that it was everywhere. And that's how they knew it was like to them every time and this happens almost I would say last 4 classes I've taught, luxury to them is always at the top with Rolex. And then they kind of learn through self-discovery of like, before you came, they were looking at your blog, kind of studying it and understanding it. And then they wanted to know, can anybody get these watches? Or is this something that's like, you have to be part of a club or a group to get them? Because they didn't recognize a lot of the brands. So.
That's interesting. I recognize that a very modern aspect of luxury is what we'll call exclusivity. And the way that that's sort of evolved is being, maybe you can afford it, but they actually won't sell it to you. Where it used to be like the barrier was can you afford it or not? Now the barrier is, will they do business with you? Meaning, can you get high enough on the list to get their attention? Or do they make so few it runs out? You wanted one so badly, you decided you would spend over retail. That's a relatively new element of luxury for me, sort of mixed into sort of the collecting and the drop culture. How much permanency would you say that has? Some of it for me seems quite temporary, like it seems like a fad. But this idea that even if you can afford it, you can't get it. Do you think that's sort of here to stay in a big way with luxury?
I mean, honestly, I actually kind of embrace it for luxury, because the idea is that, when we were working, the students and I, when we were working on a project, it was like they wanted to figure out why would they want it. And the only reason they would want it if it was something that was exclusive to them. So for them, that was something unique. Actually, some of the guys were actually talking about tailored suits. Like that would be for them the epitome, is having a custom suit that was just made for them. So I think that idea of something being custom, something being really unique, is where they could see kind of spending the money. It wasn't a luxury class, but it was an MBA marketing class. And I tend to bring up watches a lot, just because I'm also kind of interested to hear their feedback. And a lot of times it comes with this discovery process of them. They're very new to the watch industry, but they love talking about it, almost like sports. But it's very new. It's still not, they're not going on a regular basis. It's just once they get one watch, then they hear about another watch and they want to know more about the story about it. And it's even the discussion, but it's very, it's very young still. It's still kind of learning. But I think that's part of, the joy of it.
How do you think your class is going to evolve? How do you want to add more to it? And then I want to talk about luxury and academics a little bit more broadly, but I'm just curious about how you'd like to evolve this class. Do you want to turn it into an entire program? Do you want it to be a class you have to take, not an elective? Talk a little bit about how you think luxury as an educational program or class should grow within educational programs in the United States, and what departments should take them on. Should it be business? Should it be fashion? Should it be something else?
Yeah. I think part of why I love marketing is that I always think of marketers as the storytellers, the one that actually has to give the narrative. You have the designer, the creative, kind of creating the product or creating the experience. And then it's up to the marketer to kind of figure out, how do we position it? How do we put it out there? What's appropriate? So for me, I think the world of luxury forever, I started before this in the fashion industry. It was always about, how do you get the next generation invested with this? And that's been around forever. So for me, I'm thinking in the world of education, this would be a great opportunity, because now you're teaching the next generation of marketers. So the idea is, one of the textbooks I gave you is definitely very traditional marketing. And part of why I wanted to show them that was also to kind of see where we've evolved in marketing itself. And that, I always tell the students, I'm like, it's don't think of this as your audience. This is your community, because there's a big difference. When you talk to your audience, it's you doing the old kind of marketing, pushing information on them. Whereas if you're talking to a community, it's a two-way conversation, and it's a conversation. So I think the world of luxury, as far as an evolution, would be to have something like this where it is a major, where it could be going to, the film department, the fashion department, the architecture department, even graphic design, and kind of tying it all together, where then now you can create this narrative. And as you know, I love the digital space. So even going into the world of licensing, and I know the word meta isn't everybody's favorite word, but I definitely think there is a lot there that we haven't tapped yet. So, teaching, luxury in more than just one way, but multiple different ways. And how do you tell a story? How do you create this narrative?
In Europe, the luxury programs that exist are a little bit different, often because they're in cities or regions where luxury is part of the local economy. They package something about what they do or about the heritage there into some type of luxury product, which is not always a thing. Sometimes it's hospitality or parts of Italy. It's come stay here and take pictures and eat our food, and that's luxury. Other places, Switzerland and France, of course, Italy as well, they make something. And so they teach luxury as a way of helping people that are in that industry work within it. One of the things that you and I have spoken about, and I've spoken up in a lot of other ways, is that there's not enough necessary luxury management education. There's education to help you do that stuff. If you want to make luxury clothing, there's some very good programs to do that. But if you want to be a manager or an entrepreneur in the luxury space, you basically have to get lucky and apprentice under someone. Talk a little bit about what you see as being the overall types of luxury programs in Europe, and more or less what they're designed for. What can you learn from them, and where do they sort of not leave you a lot, and you have to go ahead and use your own ingenuity to create new types of curriculums?
Yeah, I mean, I was a part of a group in Zurich, and I went with a luxury class. It was an MBA class, and part of the class was to go to hospitality. So we went to a series of hotels. We went to a series of, obviously, watch houses. And then after that, we went to fashion, and then all the way down to travel and, how that looked, and then into wellness. But you could definitely see where the high points were. But I think, honestly, if I come back to what, like you mentioned, if they're known for wine, if they're known for perfume, if they're known for watch, whatever they're known for in that country, yes, you have that right in your backyard. But I think one of the things that is missing within these programs is letting the students be exposed to this, because, once they get exposed to actually seeing it, and, for me, it was my first time ever going to a watch company and seeing a watch being made. And that's when I finally understood it. It was the first time I went to a couture house and I got to see, a dress being made. Once you actually see it, you understand it. So if we are asking the next generation to, whether it's the marketing or the management or, creating their own empire, wherever it may be, because there is luxury everywhere, we need to expose them to this. And how do we do that? And, there's a lot of luxury brands that understand that. So they go around, and like Hermes a while back came and was doing the scarves here and showing the whole process of how they were made and kind of using that as an educational platform. But as far as, creating a curriculum around that, I mean, you can easily bring in different people in the area to kind of show them how something is done, and then go through backpedaling of, the business model, the marketing strategy, what their, 10-year plan is. How would you build on it when it has to do with luxury? And, one of the things we talked about the other night was even, the wine industry in California, and talking about, the winemakers and learning who the winemakers are, learning who the people are that are actually creating this. So I think if I was to say what the two things I think that the luxury industry could really use was having another program for these amazing business students, and kind of showing them the tools and letting them kind of create the path of how would be the best way to approach them. Because I know, and look, I like a lot of these brands, but the content that's being pushed out is been done before, and it's not really resonating with, the next generation coming in.
Business schools like to teach industries that have stable, established business models. And what I mean by that are, you could, as a manager, say, we're going to apply this business model, and people understand that it makes sense, and they can sort of teach this business model. In luxury, while there definitely are business models, there's more of an art to it, where the way you market yourself, the little nuances about how you sell, in many instances are far more important than the business models. Is it true that the luxury industry, from an academic standpoint, doesn't really like to focus on business models because they don't seem to work in any contemporary sense? Or are they still kind of focused on the old business model concept when they're discussed? Because I see a little bit of that, but I also see, indicators that academics are sort of given up. They're like, there's no way we can study this. It's all random. What are your observations on that?
It's, the funny thing is, when you have luxury, I'm it's funny because you're talking, I'm remembering, because I did look at other universities to see who's teaching it. And I looked at how they're teaching it and what they're applying to it. And, for them, it was, really about being part of the conglomerates and being part of those kind of big groups. It wasn't really about stepping back and, you have somebody that designs leather bags and they have a luxury product, but how do you build a business model for a luxury bag? So for instance, there was a young lady, and she wanted to create this luxury goods, and her family, it was like third generation that made these leather bags, and they were beautiful, but the price point was quite high. But, it was top leather, it was all handmade. And, under definition, it is, luxury. But the problem was she didn't know how to get it out there to the right people. So I think what you were saying is that, yes, there are traditional, but I think there's new ways that you can approach this luxury world. Like for her, one of the things that we worked on was collaboration with art galleries, and that the art galleries would align with her client that would be very interested in these one-off bags. And that could be something that they could contribute. So, yeah.
Talk a little bit more about your own personal interest in luxury. What is it that attracted you to this field academically? And what are some of the questions that you're currently trying to answer?
Yeah. So, for me with luxury, like I said, I started in fashion, and I knew luxury. I know exactly what luxury is. But then did I? And then I realized, through teaching, a lot of students, had different opinions of what luxury was. And that made me very curious, like, why? Why can't we have this kind of idea and kind of agree on it? So for me, it's understanding, this new consumer, as well as, I think, as far as an academic, as you know, part of my interest is, so my area is digital culture. So I kind of call myself like an anthropologist online and studying what people do. So I think is when I met you and I started learning about your community, I was so fascinated that this watch community was so passionate consistently for such a long time about an object. Yes, they're amazing and lots of stories, but truly fascinated with that because there's so many industries that would love that. But a lot of times in the world today, it's great today and not great tomorrow. Whereas this kind of consistently stays. And I actually think, as we've had ups and downs in the watch industry, I think there's a lot to learn from, the luxury watch industry about the craftsmanship, and not just the craftsmanship of heritage, but new brands that are coming out, like the luxury bag I was telling you. So for me, I think, limited products that you have in the store, making things more personalized, more customized. We keep trying to figure out in the world of fashion of how to slow things down. Because what happens typically, New York Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week happens. Everybody's watching the shows, whether it's on TikTok or, a live stream. And what happens is that product doesn't get shipped for 6 months. No one is waiting 6 months and saying, oh, I can't wait to get it. They all are online trying to find something that's as close to it or something similar. So with that kind of model, the way things have been working in the fashion industry, it is a mess. It's very confusing, not only for the buyers trying to figure out what they should buy for. So I think this idea of kind of personalizing, limiting is something that I think a lot of industries are going to definitely gravitate to, because every time I read, another forecasting news or any kind of insight, it's like, how do we create a product that the consumer is going to want to hold on to for even a year? Whereas, in the world of watches and actually a lot of other things in the luxury, area, is you don't think like that. That's something you're holding on to. Obviously, there's reselling and things like that, but they're actually investing. So
this is maybe a really big question, but how important is the internet to today's luxury experience? Because as antagonistic as some luxury brands might be to what is required of them on the internet, I have considered the fact that the luxury field as it is today would be quite handicapped if it wasn't for the communication and information spreading power of the internet. And I know it's a big question, but how would you sum up the importance of internet communication and media with pretty much all facets, especially watches, in today's luxury industry?
Well, I mean, I know we all know that the attention span of consumers is quite short, and most of the forecast of what people are predicting, what people are going to buy, what they're going to purchase, is always top of mind. It's what they're thinking of. And the only way to be top of mind is that if you're in front of them. And the only way to be in front of them is to be in that digital land. We used to rely on magazines. We used to rely on, TV shows, even movies. But that's actually not where the majority of the audience are looking. They're looking online. So you want to be top of mind, whether it's just to expose them, to learn about the brand, especially if it's an older brand or if it's a brand that's very exclusive. So I mentioned those gentlemen that were starting to collect watches. They're not going to Switzerland. They're not going abroad, but they still want to learn about it. So the only way to do that is to have some kind of source for them to go to. So I remember 2013, at my school, it was called the Carl Benz Academy. So it was Mercedes-Benz dealers from China coming to the US, and they wanted to learn about how we were going to tackle social media. So that was quite new, 2013. And one of the things that we were talking about is that you can now create another relationship with the customer. And also the idea of that they're already having conversations about you. So today we have, not social listening, but search listening. And this is like a great way for you don't have to guess what people are saying. You can just go on because they're always online. So I don't even think there is a question if it's important. Even, a small cobbler I know in Florence, he's online. He only takes personal guests to come, but he wants to show his craft. He wants to show what he's doing. And, it's kind of, that kind of special thing where you get to follow them now. So, when you talk about heritage brands, I think you're going to have a problem if you don't have not only some kind of, touch point to the consumer, but the right touch point, nothing that's, giving the wrong message, which there's actually a lot of them that I think are giving the wrong message and they don't understand. But yeah, no, I think it's quite important. And I think finding the right people, I think it's going to be more about tastemakers than it is the so-called influencers that are now content creators. But I think it's about people that are in the know in the area. So, for a blog to watch, you would be the tastemaker because you know about it. You're not just wearing a different watch because someone's telling you to wear it. You actually care about it and you talk about it. And, that transparency of what you give is honestly what all the brands need to be looking for, because they do know, consumers do know when it's just, the same person wearing, 12 different things in 1 week. It's like, yeah, they don't really care about that.
Well, I guess now I have to ask the question, which is near and dear to my heart. As you said, I'm a tastemaker. I'm also a product reviewer and a a portal or gateway, if you will. What is your assessment of the utility and ongoing need of platforms that not only help inform people about luxury, but help them make decisions? Because one of the things that I've realized is that as luxury is growing on the internet, there isn't accordingly more places to help you learn how to make choices. We have relatively new categories like luxury smartwatches, where there's no dedicated outlets or specialists I know of that, whether it's an individual influencer or media personality or publication, just talks about this. And so you have more and more luxury options, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of media there to catch up with it. How important is that element for the consumers? It seems like it's very important, but I'd love to hear your thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think it is. I think, as the media world keeps changing and, where we get our information, as the, magazines are still there, they're just different. But at the same time, you're starting to learn it's about the editor. It's about who's actually putting the content together that makes you kind of feel connected. So if we're talking about, a Gen Z, then they're definitely looking for someone that is kind of the expert in that area, and especially in areas that they don't know. So we had a conversation even about the wine industry, and that they feel like they wanted to know more about, nice wines, but where do you find out about this? Where do you get educated about this? And, we started looking around, and that for them, it's like when they want to get educated, the first thing they're going to do is go to YouTube. So if they want to learn about it, that's where they're going to go. That's where you go to fix things and learn things to them. And then after that, then you can kind of trickle down to the other areas. As far as, I think as each generation, there's different things that are important to you. For me, a tastemaker is someone that is an expert in that area, not in multiple areas, but really knows one particular area well. So that's the person that will create that word of mouth, because I'm going to tell my friend, follow her. She's going to tell you, the fine wines, what to pair with, at, wherever. And that's who I would go to. That's who I trust. So, you have this thing, it's, not to get but I'm trying not to be theory based here, but it's called social contagion. And it's kind of like how things catch on, how things go from one person to another person. And the idea is kind of create this social buzz. But truly, the old world of things going viral, they go quick and then down really fast. But if you really want to create this kind of social contagion where things move on, especially about, going to someone as the expert, it's really making X amount of people feel really good about it. And then that's what they're going to share. That's what they're going to tell their friend to follow, as opposed to just saying, follow this influencer because she has a lot of followers. That's not what they're saying. They're saying follow it because they're giving good information.
I've made an interesting observation, and I want to know if you agree or you would add to it. And that is that when it comes to luxury consumers, there's really only two categories they sort of fall into. And that is, one, I want to make my own decision. I like my own taste. I want to learn as much as possible what's out there, and then monitor my reaction to determine what I like and my own taste and what I want is the most important. And that's one. And the other type is, I'm more interested in what someone else likes. I want to see what other people have chosen. I want to know what people think is the best or the second best. I want to know what someone else out there studies or what they talk about. It's less about what I want, because that's not as important to me, but it's more about me wanting to find the voice I want to listen to. Like, I'm going to listen to someone. I want to go out, and rather than see what products are available, I'm going to actually browse the voices out there. And I'm going to find the one that I like. And when I do, I'll just go with what they like. And that's just sort of it. It really just sort of boils down to those two core types when it comes to how they choose. Would you add anything to that?
I mean, it's funny because you kind of reminded me of something with that. There was, it wasn't a luxury brand. It was CNA. I think it was in Spain. And they had these jackets all on hangers. And on the hangers was a digital number. So it said like 1,000, 800, 400, 200. And the hangers indicated how many people online were liking the jackets. So are you the consumer that wants to buy the jacket everyone likes? Or are you the consumer that wants to buy the jacket not a people like, but that means it would be unique and you could purchase that.
Okay. So what was the result?
So, well, the idea was that they were trying to use it like social currency of like an online post, so that, most people like posts and they don't even know what they liked. It's just kind of this automatic, scrolling through. So the idea is they wanted to kind of bring that into the store. And the great thing about it is you actually get two customers, because like you said, some people want to get that discovery and others, they know what they like and they're going in and that's what they want to purchase. And I think, in this world of discovering, it's just giving the right tools to this next group coming in, or someone that just discovered a different area they didn't even know they liked, and giving them the right kind of education to learn about it. So for, a lot of the stores, especially in the world of luxury, it's very intimidating. So, as you heard from some of the students, it's like they don't know if they're, worthy to walk into some of these stores yet. They feel like they need to be certain, established. Whereas, some of the students, they have no problem going in and they know exactly what they want. But no, I thought the idea of using, technology, I thought that was interesting. But, we all tend to follow. I mean, that's just consumer behavior, right? We follow kind of those drivers of change that make people want to purchase. You have the diffusion curve of once a lot of people purchase something, you have your tipping point where then it's done. Welcome to the world of social media. You think it's done, and then one person wears it or one other person shows it, and then it goes back up again. That's why fashion forecasting and trend forecasting is very hard right now, is because our consistent model is not there anymore. I spend way more time, looking, I was looking before we came here, looking what people are talking about online to gauge kind of cultural trends that will then say that something will last longer. Not necessarily in the world of luxury, but just what's going to be top of mind for consumers next June. What are they going to be thinking about?
You brought up something really interesting that I don't know that everyone knows about. Definitely some people in the fashion industry or marketing industry know about it. And I think that you have a background in this, and this is, I guess you call trend spotting. And this is a very complicated area, but we'll just talk about what it is traditionally and then please embellish. Essentially, companies that make fashion items want to know what to make next, right? You plan on making something now. It's not going to be ready for a while. You want consumers to have a demand for it, and it's very important that you don't waste money because that's, very damaging business-wise. So you want to know what people are going to want, and you also want to know how to invest your production, things like that. And to do that, you try to make these decisions about what's next. And the way that brands figure this out is literally hiring individuals to sample little things, walk around, look at stuff, make guesses, see what kids are doing, all trying to ask this question, which is as much an art as it is a science, I guess, of what are consumers going to be into a few months down the line. Talk a little bit about how big this is and what steps practitioners take to try to guess what is going to be next or what is trending or however they refer to it.
Yeah. I mean, so before I was a professor, for 20 years, I was a trend forecaster. So I was based in California, but my job was to go across Europe 5 times a year for 20 years and to do more like qualitative research of looking how people shop. Where do they shop? What kind of music is happening? Do they shop together? What stores do they go to? Where's the new street everybody's hanging out with? And, we did everything from like Amsterdam, Dusseldorf, Cologne, Paris, Milan. We did all of it. And then we would come back and translate it into the California kind of commercial idea of how do you translate that. And then about 2009, we kind of switched it where you had our bloggers, kind of talking about things, and that kind of changed things a little bit. So by the time we reached, 2000, I would say 15, the forecasting industry changed a lot because for the first time, everybody was getting exposed to these trends where before it wasn't, if there was a music video, if there was something, we had cyberspace, before that. So people weren't getting information that quick. So that's where you had that traditional kind of idea. You would say something's coming now And, in a year from now, this will be something you definitely want to invest into. So fast forward to now. So I do twice a year. I do a presentation. It's the largest fashion trade show in North America, to buyers from, an Urban Outfitters to a Nordstrom to a small mom and pop store in Arkansas. And they sit there, and what I do is a digital culture report. So instead of looking at your traditional runway, looking at something that's going to be shipped 6 months from now, what we do is we focus on understanding consumers and what's of interest to them. So for instance, this you may laugh at this one, but for instance, you are talking about a trend of, let's say, floral prints, and floral prints are a conversation. And then you have another trend that's talking about librarian or something about scholarly. On TikTok, one of the trends is dark academics, is something that's really big. Oh, I got hashtags like endlessly. That's all I look at is hashtags.
I don't even know what half the stuff is.
But the thing is, what I do is I explain it to them. So I tell them, one of the things that's happening with this generation that we're talking about is that they are not having kids until a lot later on. And they also are interested in taking care of something, but it has to be something else. So one of the big trends on like TikTok and Instagram is plant moms and plant dads. And people having plants. Yes. If you go to Vegas, you will see people carrying a plant on an airplane because they don't want to leave it at home. Yeah. So this is kind of this buzz of talking about this consumer and how it translates into these print ideas. And then with the librarian idea, it was this idea of book clubs are becoming popular. So CNN just wrote this big thing about how a lot of book clubs are starting. All these influencers are starting these book clubs. Libraries are the new thing to hang out in. So then we talk about trends based on consumer trends, but consumer trends based on culture. So all the different industries are kind of looking at how do you do this? So a lot of the social media companies now actually have a division. So one thing that I did last summer is I worked with TikTok because they were trying to understand, how do you know that's part of the culture? And part of it is still, people always ask me about the AI conversation. You still need to understand the zeitgeist of consumers and what their interests were, and how, the Olympics coming in July, how that's going to influence what people are thinking of and why that's going to connect to a trend. So, doing forecasting today is definitely a lot of research online. It's looking at what people are talking about, but then going after what's important to that particular consumer. I don't know if the plant mom and dad thing resonated, but I think you get the idea.
No, I mean, I think that it's just not clear to many people that there are professionals like you used to be and others. Now it's probably a whole lot of AI. I don't know how well that's going to do, which is trying to tell business people, here's what consumers might want tomorrow. Warm up the machine, start making stuff, get the designers drawing stuff out, because this is what we think people will into. And I think what's so relevant about that, especially in the watch industry, is we know plenty of times when a watch has come out, it's been a great watch, maybe from a great brand, but it does poorly. Why? Because it sort of missed the mark. Like the community, for whatever reason, wasn't into that thing right now. Maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, or 20 years previously, it would have done great. And it's a big issue, because if a company comes out with a qualitatively great product, it can still miserably fail because there isn't a desire for it. And consumers, whether or not they like to know it or not, are influenced by things in their environment that make them want to buy one thing or not another. They all want to buy stuff, but they make a lot of strange decisions about what they buy. They're not always conscious of it. And so if you're in the business of selling stuff to people, yes, you want to make something good, but you also want to make something that they agree that they want and that they're even thinking about. And that is such a big problem. And the brands today, they like to paint the topic. They say storytelling. You got to do more storytelling. Well, what they're really saying is we have to explain to people why you even want this thing, because there's no demand out there because they don't even know how cool it is. And that is really, I think, the interesting mix is, are you a company that can invent demand by doing the storytelling and telling people in a vacuum why your thing is awesome without influencers having done it? Or do you say, consumers like this design, they're into this messaging, they're into these colors, they're into these shapes. I'll make something that kind of looks like that and hope they buy it. And I think what's interesting is if you go the familiar approach, meaning you make something that consumers want, you could do fantastically, but you're so susceptible to trends changing that your success could go as quickly as it came. Whereas if you make something original, which is yours, there's a slower buildup of success. It usually takes longer before people know about it and want it. But once people get into it, there tends to be a momentum of demand so long that you were truly different to begin with. And there's no right answer of which direction to go. But, and I think you'll agree, Wendy, you can't do both things at the same time usually.
No, and honestly, that's the old way of doing it. You can't do it that way. And when, other forecasting companies, I mean, there's some really good ones and there's some really bad ones. And I watched their presentation and I'm like, where are you getting the information that you should even do that? Because I want to hear, if you're planning on selling something 2 years from now, what is going to be the state of mind of that consumer? You have politics, you have all these things. You have to think about everything. And it literally is taking that information and then figuring out what product is going to be connected to your consumer. I think the traditional way of just looking at, a lot of times you'll get a book, you'll have an online source, you look at what trends are. If it's a top tier one, it's going to cost you, $25,000 a year, $30,000 a year to subscribe to a forecasting service. And, there are cheaper ones, but the idea is these are big box kind of retailers and they all try to jump in. But the idea that you need to do is really think about what's going to be top of mind and what does your consumer want? Hence the search listening of you can listen to what they want, really kind of digging in. And I've seen a lot of audience intelligence software companies. They're great, but honestly, nobody has the bandwidth to kind of do it. So they need people to kind of show them how you even use it to find these things.
We're almost out of time, but I want to talk about something that you've been studying related to the Blog to Watch audience. I know that your complete findings are not made available yet. I'm personally curious, but talk about what is it you're studying and what do you think some of the outcomes might be? Maybe a little bit about your methodology in relation to the actual Blog to Watch community.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I have been fascinated with your audience, your community, is because you have a very passionate community. And I say that because part of my research is to understand digital culture behavior, motivations, but also look at communities as almost a second tier of opinion leaders, of not someone that we should maybe, I'm not saying your audience is someone that I would hire to represent my brand, but it's something in the terms of listening and learning from them. I've learned so much from your audience. So I have studied them for 4 years, all your social platforms, just reading, looking at other kind of areas, why people don't like things and kind of following that rabbit hole. And, within that, what I've kind of really focused on was that how close-knit your community is. And with that gives it the power. So when they say they don't like something or do like something, that it really kind of influences, other communities, because that's your part of your social contagion and that word of mouth. I work with a lot of influencers. There's actually an influencer council, the American Influencer Council in New York, and they help influencers. But part of what I'm trying to show them is actually even another way of using your community to kind of get a better guide. And I know you talk to your community all the time. You do lots of surveys. You talk to them. You really understand them. But I think I think the evolution of influencers and tastemakers and bloggers, whatever we want to call, is that you have to curate your community and take care of it for it actually to have the value. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of working on right now. But I clearly see the value, and I see it going into other industries, but definitely industries with niches that, you have big watch companies that still don't know how to resonate with some of their audience, yet you have like the perfect opportunity to connect with them.
Here's maybe one last question that I think is interesting, and I'll call it the bad comments issue. Brands today, because of social media, not just brands, people, celebrities, are privy to conversations that may have existed in the past but were private, right? And I sort of like to use the example, someone's performing at a show and they could be thinking they're doing great. It's a musician, comedian, whatever it is, they're talking to an audience. They could be thinking they're doing great. And maybe someone in the audience is snickering, they're laughing, with their buddy. And this would be something completely ignorant to the performer. They see the applause, they think they did a good job. They're great. Now, all of a sudden, a couple of jerks in the corner, their conversation is happening online. It's visible for everyone to see. So what used to be a private conversation amongst friends is now open, and the person they're speaking about hears it and has a negative reaction. Now, historically speaking, these many little snickering conversations never hurt the celebrity or the massive brand. But these days, because it's now public and they can hear it, well, there's sort of an outside defensiveness. And so I guess the question is, how damaging are these negative comments, or are they just sort of one of many factors that consumers take into mind? Because we're talking about trends, we're talking about data, we're talking about influence and sentiment, things like that. Talk to the brands out there. What should they feel about the negative commentary? Maybe more importantly, what should be some of their reactions to it or their responses to it?
Yeah, I mean, you do have access to all the information. And if it's not on their platform, it's on another platform. You have to remember that you also have to be respectful of other platforms, because I've seen, not on your site, but on other sites, that some people start to answer back and kind of defend. And the truth is, it's like it's walking into a group they weren't really invited into. And then that's not what they should be doing. They should just be listening to the information. Now, if it's on their platform, then yes, you need to address it. But part of like search listening, or so the methodology I use is called netnography. It's kind of like ethnography. It's part of anthropology, understanding culture and social behavior. So I see, there's certain people on sites where they always talk. They always say something for that shocker effect. But then, for you, you definitely have posts that I know, like, oh, here we go. I know what's going to happen now, because it's a trigger. It's something, but in a way, it's good banter and conversation for them. So I think for brands, it's really just doing the listening part. So we used to say social listening was, learn about your brand sentiment online. Are they saying negative, positive? But what you actually need to do is listen to what they're saying, even if it's not about your brand. What is resonating with them, with that brand? What is other opportunities that they could gain from that? So, we always want to have an answer, but, social listening or search listening, there's great tools out there that are free, even, where you can just listen to how people are saying or what they're in need of, and I think that's part of the process of really knowing what's going to resonate with your brand. And it's kind of like saying, how could we do better in a retail store? And it's like, well, get customer service where they, treat you well. It's the same kind of thing, I think, with social. It's like you have a focus group out there that is telling you what they don't like and what they do like. You need to just listen to that. And that's going to be your forecast of what you should be looking at.
Really good advice. Wendy Bendoni, professor, please tell everyone where they can learn more about you and find you on the internet.
Oh, great. Well, you can always look me up on LinkedIn, Wendy Bendoni. Definitely love to talk to anyone about anything like this. I'm always interested, especially for research, learning more about communities, and then wendybendoni.com. So, but yeah, thank you for this.
Once I've seen what you're able to share about the findings of the Blog to Watch audience, we'll probably have to have another conversation. So I will hope you'll join me again. Thank you so much. This has been the Superlative podcast interview with Professor Wendy Bendoni. Wendy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.